when we last talked, man, you, myself, and Kevin, uh, we were talking about the crazy NBA trades that went down. That was before all the free agency signings and everything, and how you kind of teased when we last talked about the CBA, how this all that those inner workings work, and how much cash actually shelled out. Because I mean, we look at all these signings, right? Jeremy Grant, 160 mil over 5 years. Fred VanVleet, which I know contract amuses you, 128 mil over 3 years. Kyrie Irving, 126, 3 years. Draymond Green, 100 million years. Well, I'm sorry, 100 million over 4 years, not 100 million years. And my favorite one by far, Cameron Johnson, 94.5 mil over 4 years. So, with honorable mention to Dylan Brooks for 86 million over 4 years. I can't understand, still understand how in hell any team, let alone Houston, could give a dude with a broke ass jump shot $86 million. But that's not here nor there. I mentioned in the past that I chose the wrong line of work. Like we've seen all these NBA contracts, stupid NBA contracts doled out. Hey, I'm not mad at the player. I just hate the game that they're playing, right? And so with all this, people wondering how much cash is actually being doled out, and how does NBA teams manage to scrunch all this cash together. I know there is the upcoming media deal with TNT and ESPN. I think that's already passed. I don't know. That's raising the salary cap. And there's some things you mentioned in the CBA that's affected this. So I'm gonna turn the floor over to you and have you educate me and the viewers out there how the CBA and the inner works of the NBA and actually how much cash actually be doled out to these players and how the NBA teams manage to fit all this cash underneath that cap.
Sure. The way I like to think about it is you've got an entire pie, and every player gets a piece of that pie. LeBron James is pulling the biggest piece. He makes the largest salary. Guys that are lower on the totem pole, like Max Christie, who's on a rookie minimum, he's getting a little slice of the pie. When you break it down, when you look at it that way, you can see LeBron's big slice of the pie takes up 40% of that pie. So because his cap hit is, just to use round numbers, if your salary cap is $100 million, he's taken up $40 million of that. He's got 40%. The remaining 60 has to get spread out amongst the rest of the team.
Right.
Well, every year the cap goes up depending on the revenue that the NBA made.
Yeah.
We all remember the summer that the cap spiked when they signed their TV deal and the previous TV deal, and that allowed Kevin Durant to go to the Golden State Warriors because it was just a cap anomaly. The players union back then voted to just throw it all once they got it, they want it all on the cap. And then that just, if you were lucky to be a free agent that year, you got paid. Luol Deng got a big contract.
Oh, I remember
that. It was
yeah.
Yeah, there were some fun ones. Timothy Mozgov got a big one. So it was the Lakers had fun that year. So what the new CBA and the players union, they all voted and they all came to their agreement and everything, was instead of the cap spiking 30% one year, they're going to limit the cap spike at 10% every year.
Okay.
So if you have 30%, you're making 30% of revenue for this year, you take 10% out of that and you add it to the new cap.
Okay.
So if your cap is $100 million, you're taking 10% of the 30% growth, and you're making the cap now $110 million. So like the contracts that are being signed this year, I chuckle a little bit at when somebody thinks like Jeremy Grant, you said, was 5 for 160. 5 for 160, when you break that down is round number, well, 31, $32 million a year.
Right.
Well, if the cap right now is 100 and I'll have to relook, but I believe the cap right now is like $160 million in 3 years. Or it's like $140 million in 3 years. the cap is going to go up 10% each year because the new media deal is going to be so lucrative. It's just going to be able to spike that much. The NBA is projecting that the next 5 years, there will be 10% increases in the salary cap every single year. So you're looking at a $30 million contract now looks a lot more onerous against $140 million cap, but a whole lot less against $190 or $195 million cap in 3 years. And he's still got 2 more on it. So yes, the numbers look insane right now. And I agree, but they won't hinder the teams that signed these contracts as much as it looks like they will now.
Interesting. So I'm glad you broke that down because, I look at it like the NFL has a hard ass cap, right? So I'm looking at it from that perspective. I'm not looking at it, obviously, from the NBA perspective. Not many people are because the math is just different. I mean, plus the NBA, it's a softer cap anyway, right? Because you have ways to get around the cap, and you got the bird rights, you got mid-level exceptions, you got all this other math that's figured into these cap numbers and how they can fit players underneath that cap, right? So it's a different math than the NFL, but I'm glad you broke that down. So basically, first of all, thank you for that. So having said all that, like,
do you mind if I expand on something you just talked about?
Oh, go. No, by all means, go ahead, brother. I mean, you're here to educate us, so go right ahead.
You were talking about the mid-level exception.
Yes.
And how that is a tool that teams that are over the cap can use to bring in a decent player.
Right.
Well, as part of the new CBA that was signed, if you're a team like, say, Phoenix.
Right.
Phoenix right now can only use can only do minimum signings because they used just the way their cap worked out. They could only do it this way, like this year. And they will not have access to the mid-level exception next year or the following year because they're in their repeater taxes over top of that. That's part of that's part of the penalties for being over that second tax apron that the new CBA put into place to prevent the Phoenix Suns and the Golden State Warriors from having 5 and 6 massive contracts and still being able to pull in another $10 million contract. They will only have access to minimum level players.
Yeah, because you got KD, Devin Booker, and now Bradley Beal, right? Because I think Bradley Beal already had a max. So you got 3 max deals on the same squad.
You technically have 4 because DeAndre Ayton's contract is a rookie scale max contract. Granted, the rookie scale max contract is a lot less than the veterans scale max contract, and then the super max contract, it's still less than those, but it's still technically a maxed out contract.
Got it.
So you've got four massive contracts, and then you've surrounded it by minimum signings.
Yeah. So basically, imagine like having 4 managers and a bunch of minimum wage guys. That's what you got.
The McDonald's model.
There you go. That's Phoenix Suns right now. Just call them the Phoenix grimaces. Yes, that's going to be interesting. That's why, I mean, it makes sense. That's why I was always like, I decried the actual Bradley Beal trade because I'm like, well, who the hell are you going to have for your depth? You traded all away your depth. Your depth is gone. Like, I ain't going to fill in outside of minimum wage dudes, and you just laid it out. So, I mean, Phoenix is going to be.
I can answer that question.
Okay.
All right. So, with the way the contracts are built now, we'll stay in Phoenix, for example.
Yes.
You've maxed out all your cap space, and you're at minimum salaries. Well, around the league, it's essentially the same thing. You've got a couple of big contracts, and then you've got much smaller contracts that are on the book on your books. Yeah. In Phoenix, you've got Kevin Durant, and you've got Devin Booker, and you've got Bradley Beal. So you're hoping that the guys that are on the minimum, that are not quite mid-level exception players, because that's about the only contracts that are signed anymore, are either anything mid-level exception or above, and then down to minimum. So your mid-level exceptions, $9-10 million. You don't see many $5 million a year contracts signed. Those are minimum salaries. So a guy like Eric Gordon couldn't find anything at the mid-level. Nobody gave him the mid-level their mid-level exception, or anybody had money that came close to it. So instead of signing for what, $5 million with, we'll say, the Pacers, okay, I'll take, $1.5 million, $2 million less, and go play for a chip in Phoenix. So that's how teams like that are going to try to build in the future. And that's where you have players. It's Christian Wood essentially too. Right. Like Christian Wood put up 16 points, 5 rebounds, X amount of assists. He had, by all accounts, a decent season that does demand a certain contract, but he couldn't find it. So he'll sign for the minimum somewhere and try to repair, because he's young enough, kind of like Dennis Schroeder did last year in LA. He had a really good season and then parlayed that into most of Toronto's mid-level exception. So that's how teams like Phoenix, and I won't say the Clippers, because I don't know how they defy the cap like they do. Like Phoenix and LA, like those teams are